everyone. I'm happy to welcome back Tilla Debs from Zefiro Methane today. How are you doing?
I'm doing great, Ron.
All right,
Yourself?
awesome. So I got a number of questions, a lot from different investors, whatnot. I hear from. So maybe start with the Trump administration. They seem to support the carbon market with Elon Musk quite a champion there, but do not support climate change. Do you think that'll affect future funding for these abandoned well programs?
Well, not in the near term that we can see because our funding comes from corporates that's driven by regulatory, and then second funding sources, government, state and local and federal, and that's already moving again pretty well. And then the carbon market is still very much out there, and I don't see that going away. I don't see there's obviously these things ebb and flow, but net zero is still an objective for a lot of people. And that is going to create ample demand for our emission reduction products over
Yeah, I
time.
didn't have too much concern there, but I've heard the question a few times. So, and I see you recently got a license to operate in Texas, and there's funding there. How many wells are you targeting there this year and next year? Any ideas there?
Well, look, we're targeting to be in each material basin, and obviously Texas is one of the if not the heartland of the energy markets in the U.S. And so, we've surveyed, I think, over 100 wells so far this year, and we would look to be doing orphan well work as well as for the under government funding, as well as carbon credit work. And we're also speaking to some landowners and some producers about corporate work in Texas. So we are going to aim to be as big in Texas as we are in Appalachia. As for the timing, we're not going to overpromise, but I think there's a lot of demand, and we want to be there, and it looks like there's demand for us to be there. So we're excited about Texas.
Yeah, okay. I know you have a 5,000 well per year target, and so I expect you have some acquisitions so you can make that. So what does that pipeline look like now? Or any on the horizon here?
Sure. So now we have a pretty rich pipeline of operators of rigs and skilled teams that can operate in the basins that we want to be in. And it's probably that pipeline is probably three times as much volume as we need to transact to get to that target. So we're actually, some have commented on the low oil price and how that might impact our business plan. Right now, it doesn't really impact our revenues because we really work for corporates who already are doing an approved, pre-planned, scheduled slate of plugging. So that tends not to move when oil prices move. But what does happen when oil prices move is a lot of the discretionary work that work over service companies that may be competing with us for some of the plugging work. They will tend to put a lot of their rigs in the yard and scale back when oil prices drop. And that provides us with an opportunity to potentially acquire either teams or rigs or whole businesses at a time when they are, not experience they're not experiencing their strongest growth.
Right.
It's sort of, I don't want to say distressed because you don't really want to buy a distressed business, but when there's opportunities to make a good transaction, that's great for our shareholders. So I think
Okay.
that acquisition pipeline is even better right now.
Yeah, so if we see this weakness in oil a bit more, then that's actually a benefit to that strategy then.
It is counterintuitively so, but yeah.
Okay. And then I saw the news there at the partnership with GeoLab, they have a detection system, and Canum, I guess it's an AI and data development firm. Can you explain a bit more how these will help with your goals there?
Sure. So the cleanup of the orphan well population, which is again about almost approximately 4 million wells in the U.S. Those are spread across 26 states. They are not easy to find. They are, and they're leaking methane at rates that are definitely damaging to local communities, to the environment, and what have you. But there's 4 million sites, and we don't want to be surveying those wells, for the next decade before we know which ones we want to plug. And so we're using AI and available data, plus our own subsurface models um, and ground truth data. So we do send teams often into the field, and we're putting that all together with our AI, with these partners, and with other contributions as well to create a what you might call a digital twin, but it's basically it's a model of the 4 million sites that are out there, where they are, how much they're likely to be leaking, and how easy they might be to get to, because we can map them. So when you have all that information, we use that program to suggest to us where would it be good to go look for leaking wells that we can find and stop the leak, and have that be, get to the biggest leakers quickest and most efficiently. That's what that's for.
Oh, okay. Yeah, that was kind of one of my questions too, how you find which ones are leaking. And so on that point do you have kind of a ballpark number what percentage of these abandoned wells are leaking?
Yeah. So there is public data out there. There is academic work that goes back now about 15 years. And, when I read that work and I look at our data, I think the general rule of thumb I use is that about a third of the wells that are out there of that 4 million have reached a state of degradation where they're leaking material amounts of methane. By material, I might say an average of about 50,000 tons, 30 to 50,000 tons of carbon equivalent. And so that number, it might be just a number to people, but that's enough where it can really be causing a problem. Now, those other wells that are not currently leaking at those levels, presumably they'll get there someday. They're just, they haven't leaked yet. They're
Yeah.
younger maybe, or they've just had more luck. And so we're going after that leakiest third. And even within that leaky population, it's not just they're all leaking an average number. There are some real super leakers out there that are very, very leaky. We tend to think those are, you know, generally not a huge problem, because if they're leaking at a prolific rate where, say, they can be heard or detected by communities nearby, generally local authorities will come in and at least stop the leak. But for the ones that are more remote, more subtle, just sort of a slow leak causing problems over time, they can sit there and kind of metastasize for years. And we think that's what's going to be really the bread and butter of what we do, is to clean up that population.
Okay. Uh, yeah, on the carbon, I've seen targets, 30 billion to 100 billion for the market by 2030. I know you guys have a lot of expertise there. Where do you see that? Like that's a huge increase. Is that really a realistic expectation or?
Well, I haven't seen that exact estimate. I mean, we've got a $3 to $4 billion market today,
Yeah,
roughly 300 to 400 million tons. So average clearing price is around $10 a ton. My data may be old, but I think I'm roughly in the zip code. And for the market to be 10 times its current size, it's not at all impossible by 2030, especially as the companies that are committed to cleaner emissions get closer and closer to that 2030 date that they're considering as their benchmark date. There will be more and more. It'll be harder and harder to find projects to reduce emissions, and I think you'll find there will be a scale up. And look, at 3 to 4 billion notional now, it still is a pretty big market.
yeah, yeah. Okay. I noticed in the financials about 7 million in warrants exercised in 2024. There's still what 9.5 outstanding then. Exercise price was, I think, average 28 cents. Have many more of them been exercised? Is there many left? Or 'cause I think that might be affecting the share price some, you know?
Well, look, I mean, that very well might be. Investors, some of them care a lot about it, some of them not so much.
Yeah.
But our main look, any of those warrants that were relatively low price warrants were incentivized to incentivize investors in the early stage of our growth. It's a cost of doing business that we've always baked into our business plans. We can absorb that value without being diluted. My main message to the warrant holders is to exercise and jump in because the water is nice and warm, and we're growing the business. And frankly, we'd rather take away the question that people may have about the warrants, but we do all of our internal calculations on a fully diluted basis. So I always assume the warrants are going to exercise. And even at those levels, I feel really happy about where we are.
Okay. And then cash flow. When do you expect to be cash flow positive?
Well, depending on how you do it, I mean, we think we're already there, but on a free cash flow basis, we believe we are cash flow positive now. We'll be making some more detailed releases on how that could be in the coming in our next release. Where earnings, the accounting earnings is always a challenge when you're dealing with a business that has a lot of depreciation and goodwill in the accounting. So these lead to non-cash charges. But on a free cash flow basis, we think we've broken the back of the climb up to profitability, and from here it's all upside.
Okay. And on margins, what would kind of be the average margin you do on, say, operation? I don't know, maybe 10 wells in a program or something.
Yeah, I mean, we try to realize margins in that 20% range on an EBITDA basis. Oftentimes our gross margins are much better than that, but we have to allocate for overhead and other costs. And at 20%, we would be I think it's given the fundamental dynamics of the business and the level of growth, we think that would be, you know, should be really acceptable to our investors. We reinvest our margin fully into growth.
Yeah.
And so, in a way, the way that I think our shares offer the greatest upside is, frankly, as a growth engine and not as a dividend stock. So, margin, I think, is a measure of, are we staying profitable? Are we growing safely? And we like to keep track on that.
Yeah. So
But
that wouldn't,
20% is the target, and I think that through the cycle, we'll be right on top of that.
so that wouldn't include carbon credits, or is that kind of baked into that?
That's baked in. I mean, if and when the carbon credit markets really take off in volume and become a material adder, then yes, carbon credits are a lot more profitable, and we think we're in the pole position to grab, the leadership in that. So that's a huge upside. So that does not include the carbon credit kicker.
Right, right. Okay, that's the questions I had. Any point you want to make or something we didn't touch on you think's important?
Well, I think the biggest thing coming out of the early part of this year is I think a lot of people were worried about, the general slowdown in the economy. Businesses were affected by slowdown in the economy, slowdown of government work, and potentially a de-emphasis of sustainability-based businesses. And I would say, as I sit here today, look, the slowdown in economy is not we're gonna be fine. It definitely affects us like everyone else, but because we're base load and we need, our services are needed sort of in season and out of season for all of our product lines, we're pleased to say I think we're going to weather this storm better than most. And then the carbon credit markets remain an upside, I'm very pleased to say. the death of that market was greatly exaggerated as some twist on Mark Twain. But I think that we'll have a lot of pleasant surprises for people in the coming months and years.
Okay, great. All
Thank
right.
you.
That's all I had. So thanks for coming on and giving us a great update.
Thanks, Ron, for following us, and thanks for the questions.
Yeah. Okay.
All right.
Bye for now.
Bye bye.